The U.S. State Department just dealt a crushing blow to the Palestinian Authority, revoking visas for Mahmoud Abbas and his entire delegation right before the UN General Assembly. No visas, no stage, no global recognition ceremony. Meanwhile, Trump is warning Israel, you're winning the war but losing the PR battle. Finish the job fast. And Prime Minister Netanyahu just released an urgent message to IDF forces as they prepare for the final push into Gaza City. 3 bombshell developments, 1 critical moment. How are they all connected? Stay tuned to Israel Undiplomatic to find out.
Welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and I'm here as per usual with my co-host, Ruthie Bloom. How are you today, Ruthie?
Pretty good, although I have to say there's a lot of chaos in the country. However, there's some very good news out of Washington. The State Department announced on Friday that it would be revoking and denying visas to the Palestinian Authority and PLO delegations to the UN General Assembly. And that means that PA Chairman Mahmoud Abbas and his delegation of terrorists and ties will not be able to show up and be given all these accolades, and all these Europeans and Australia and all these member states bestowing on them unilateral recognition of a phony Palestinian state. So I thought this was a really very important move.
Can I say important? I agree, but you're wrong on the, maybe you misspoke, but you're wrong that this will somehow stop France and Britain and Belgium and Australia and Canada from recognizing a Palestinian state. I think it's good to put the pressure on the Palestinians. I think I applaud the Americans for what they've done. I think it's right. And I think actually they were very specific. They said that their push for a statehood outside a peace process, outside negotiations, their support for terrorism, their failure to condemn October 7th, and all that, I applaud the Americans. And the Americans have also come out very strongly against the idea that Europeans and others will declare recognition of a state of Palestine that doesn't exist. So the Americans say and do the right things. But will this affect the Europeans that they're not going to do it? I think not. I think that's not true.
Oh, I totally agree with you. They'll do it, but the point is that Abbas won't be there to be honored. They'll still do it, okay, because their move is more anti-Israel than it is pro-Palestinian. But the reason it's a beautiful move on the part of the Trump administration, and you're right, said yes, when at some, a future date, when you change your education system, stop rewarding terrorism, can do all those things, change your entire society. In other words, Mark, never. But okay, some people think it'll happen. As I always say, when apples grow on cherry trees, okay. But the reason I thought it was brilliant really had nothing to do with the Palestinians. It had to do with the Europeans. First of all, it's just a symbolic gesture anyway. Even if he showed up and even if they recognize it, right, it doesn't make it happen. There is no state, okay? I mean, they had a statelet in Gaza that is, we see what happened there, a terrorist state, and in Judea and Samaria, which is also a terrorist entity. But the beauty of it was that it was a message from a new America, the Make America Great Again on the world stage, a message from America, not only to Europe, to Australia, Canada. There are other countries that aren't in Europe, that it's a message to them. You people, today, you are irrelevant. I am the one who counts when it comes to the Gaza war, when it comes to Israel, our alliance with Israel. I make the decisions, not you. And that's why I thought it was so brilliant, because it was saying to them, you think you can, you can say what you want, but sorry, Israel is our ally. And whatever you do, you're a bunch of small, irrelevant countries right now, especially if you're siding with the West, the enemies of the West.
So I think I remember distinctly a few years back, the General Assembly of the United Nations passed a resolution recognizing Palestine as a state. And Abbas was there, and there were, as you said, and there could have been this year as well, there was a huge celebration at the UN, and there was an applause and a standing ovation, and everyone was very, very happy. And they had a huge, big celebration party in Ramallah, and they sung and danced and had a great time. And when they woke up the next morning with a hangover, the Palestinians saw that nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. And what the Europeans are proposing now is more of the same. In other words, this is the politics of theater. This is what progressives call virtue signaling. Yes, this is all about feeling good for some people who think they might be doing the right thing. But what you said, and I want to hammer down on this because I agree 100%, if there's going to be a ceasefire in Gaza or not, the Europeans are irrelevant. It's an American show. It's America. It's the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu. It's the relationship between the White House and Jerusalem. There have been serious talks. There can be again serious talks for a ceasefire and a hostage release. That's very much being discussed today in Israel. Do we agree to get part of them out, or do we demand everyone to get them out? Will there not be a deal because Hamas is a bunch of kamikazes and they don't give a hoot about anything except their own jihad? Yes, which is also unfortunately quite possible. But whatever the state, the Europeans are irrelevant in this process. I should take that back a bit. They have the ability to cause problems. And if one asks the question, and we've discussed this on our program in the past, if Hamas believes that in the end Israel will be forced to end the war against it, to end military operations, because the Europeans and the Australians and the Canadians have been calling for a ceasefire, yes? And the Brits, I should mention the Brits as well. If Hamas thinks that they have a get-out-of-jail-free card, in other words, they just have to wait, and in the end there'll be this pressure on Israel to stop the war. So that's not helping getting a ceasefire. Why would they make concessions if they think they can get everything they want for free?
Well, anyway, aside from that, as we've also pointed out on previous programs, we all want to end the war, okay? We want the killing to stop on all sides. We can only end the war when Israel is victorious over Hamas. The difference between one camp and another is one says Israel should surrender to Hamas, and the others, like you and me, say Hamas should surrender to Israel. I also would just like to add one tiny thing because it's relevant to some of the emails. We're really appreciative of emails you send us and of comments on our YouTube channel. We really do appreciate it, and we read as many as we can. And I just would like to add one tiny correction. You said, the Brits and the French and the Canadians. No. It's their governments. And the reason I'm pointing that out is that a few people have said, no, don't consider. Australians have written to us saying, we hate that government. Don't consider us anti-Israel. It's Albanese. Or they'll say, we don't agree with our government. So I think it's really important to give a shout out to the people who listen to this program and who say, don't just say all the Brits and all the Canadians. And I take that seriously. And I know they mean it because, as you and I know, in Israel too, when they say, Israelis think that and Israelis think that. No. We are divided on many issues. And so I appreciate the viewers who say we are staunchly pro-Israel and don't think that our governments who aren't represent us.
So that's clear. I mean, in democratic countries, people have different opinions and can express their opinions as they do in Israel. Though I would think, it's like if someone came to me and said, well, Netanyahu doesn't represent the peace of Israel. Well, the ballot box says otherwise. And I hate to say this, but the ballot box puts Starmer and the Australian Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister and the German Chancellor. In other words, all these people are democratically elected. So you've got to be careful with that argument. What I would say, though, is the following. You said there's one group of people in Israel who say, let's surrender to Hamas's demands. And there's another group of people
around the world.
Yeah. And there's another group of people who say we've got to win this war. And I think you're not doing justice to the opponents of the government who say peacefire now. I agree with you in substance that basically they're saying we should give in to Hamas's demands and just nothing's important, just get the hostages out, right? And I disagree with them. I think they're wrong, and we can discuss why they're wrong. But their argument is, and once again, I think their argument is flawed, but their argument is it's not surrender. They say we agree to a ceasefire now, and we will have opportunity in the future to settle scores with Hamas. The most important thing is to get hostages out. That's their argument. That's the way they make their argument. They say we have no illusions about Hamas. It's just we need to get hostages out. There'll be some sort of ceasefire. Hamas will give us a reason in the future to finish the job. I think they're wrong. I know think they're wrong. And one of the clear reasons is, like, Israel has trouble, with legitimacy now, both internally and internationally. If there's a ceasefire, Israel's going to suddenly break a ceasefire because Hamas is digging a few tunnels and no one's been hurt. And then it becomes this sort of salami tactics. They do something small, and then they do something small, and they do something small. But when it all puts together, suddenly you're facing October 7th again. That's the truth.
Furthermore, no ceasefire is going to see the release of all the hostages. Hamas is not going to release all the hostages, period. We have to put military pressure. We have to defeat them. We have to try desperately to rescue the hostages or to get them, to get Hamas to release them. But they're not going to do that voluntarily. No ceasefire. A few here, a few there, and then another ceasefire, and they build more tunnels. But I think this is important. This brings us to another topic that I think that there's a misconception about slightly, and I noticed that the Israeli left has been either purposely or not purposely, there I won't decide, mistranslating the spirit of President Trump's interview with the Daily Caller this week, okay? President Trump said, now I have to paraphrase because I don't have the text in front of me. He said, Israel is winning the war, but it is definitely losing the PR battle. So you guys better hurry up. You got to end this war. Let's get this over with. So we can move on. By the way, and then he also said, it's really terrible. In about 15 years ago, in the United States, there was bipartisan support for Israel, or the lobbyists in Congress. Congress was totally behind Israel, and now we're losing Congress. And he said, and that's the Democrats' fault, is what he said, okay? I happen to agree with it, but right now I don't even want to discuss what's the truth of the matter or not. I noticed that the left-wing press here, what they did, I think it was disingenuous, but okay, you might argue with me. They said, this is how they reported it. President Trump said, you got to end the war now, okay, because you're losing the PR war, so you got to end the war in Gaza now. Not indicating that he meant win the war in Gaza now. Number two, they said, and he said that it's been about 15 years since Congress was totally on Israel's side. And then pause. And who's been prime minister of Israel in those last 15 years? In other words, again, going back to the old lie that Netanyahu is at fault for a split between Democrats and Republicans in America where support for Israel is concerned. That's nonsense. But I thought it was interesting that the Israeli left wants to portray it as though Trump, they try to portray themselves as kind of pro-Trump, not anti-Trump. It's interesting because the American left sure hates Trump. But they want to say, you see, even Trump thinks that about Netanyahu. And just one last thing, when you said before, we're still negotiating. I'm not so sure. I mean, everything's being discussed, but the truth is, Netanyahu said, and I think it's partially because of President Trump, he announced, that's it, we're calling up the reserves, we're conducting we're going to defeat the last stronghold of Hamas in Gaza City and the camps in the center. We have Gazans moving south to humanitarian zones. And he said, okay, no more nice guy. None of this business with Hamas saying, okay, we'll give you a few hostages in exchange for tons of terrorists and a ceasefire and all that, because Hamas rejected that deal that was put forth by Steve Witkoff weeks ago. And we gave Hamas weeks to not only to sort of strengthen itself again, but to hoard all the humanitarian aid again, etc. So I think right now, what we're seeing is we're actually going to finish this war now, and it's the negotiations are not really. I mean, Netanyahu made a statement on video yesterday, encouraging the troops, saying, we appreciate you, and we know, and you're. So I just don't see that we're negotiating.
I'm not sure. I've seen, like you, the call up of thousands of reservists for a major military operation. And it's clear that if Hamas gives us no alternative, we will go in and we'll finish the job militarily in Gaza City. But part of me thinks that Netanyahu is being more nuanced than that. That the idea of all these military preparations is to show Hamas that we really mean difference. And we don't know, neither of us, not you, not I, know what's going on behind the scenes in the negotiations. Is it possible Netanyahu saying, I don't want 10 live hostages out, I want 15 live hostages out? In other words, maybe he's making demands and he's mobilizing his forces, right? And the idea is coercive diplomacy. Okay, you just give us a better deal and we'll agree to a seat. In other words, we don't know what's going on. And I think the possibility, I don't think history's closed the door yet to that possibility, even though at the moment it looks like you are correct that option has faded. You talked about the Israeli left being looking to Washington, even to President Trump. The whole left around the world hates Trump, including the left in the United States, but somehow the Israeli left loves Trump, and that's because they understand that the only way for their agenda to move forward is American pressure on Israel in their direction. And so, of course, they're going to be nice to Trump. In other words, they want Trump to squeeze Netanyahu to finish the war, this sort of thing. It's not happening, obviously. So far, it hasn't happened. At least we can say with certainty. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. The indications are that wouldn't be the situation. But that's why the Israeli left is actually very, very respectful of Trump, more so than, once again, the left in France or Germany or in Britain. Having said that, I think we have to say something that our North American viewers need to hear, that Israel doesn't have a strong, even on the left, a strong tendency towards anti-Americanism. The French were saved in 2 world wars and the Cold War by the United States of America. The Brits the same, right? The Germans were defeated by the Americans, but maybe they've got a better life without Nazism, and actually America did them a favor. But in all those countries, there's this sort of trendy, popular anti-Americanism. In Israel, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. This country must be one of the most pro-American countries on the planet, and I'm proud of it. That you can find these French and these Germans and these Brits who are anti-American, and it's very trendy, and politicians can get applause lines for saying, we won't do America's bidding, right? No, it's not that. Last thing you said, and you spoke about Congress, and the president spoke about Congress, and this the idea that Netanyahu has hurt the relationship with the Democrats, and it's his fault. And what they usually point to is that famous speech where he went to Congress and spoke out against the Iran deal. And they say, well, he played into partisan politics. He was invited by Boehner, the Republican speaker, to attack the administration. And that's why all the Democrats are against him today. And I say that's true, but that's not why the Democratic Party has a problem with Israel. I think across the globe there is a phenomena where Palestine, the Palestinian cause, has become the litmus test for commitment to left-wing progressive values. It's like the holy grail. People don't even think about it. It's just automatic. If I'm a left-winger, I love Palestinians and hate Israelis. And that's affected the left in Germany. That's affected the left in Britain. That's affected the left in France. In all the countries of and in Canada and Australia too, it's the litmus test for the left. Now, so when you have a mainstream left of centre parties like the Democratic Party in the United States, like the Labour Party in Australia, like the Labour Party in Britain, and so forth and so on, you have a left-wing faction that makes a lot of noise. And politicians, sometimes, like Keir Starmer, he was having all these troubles with the parliament, and then he recognises Palestine, and suddenly the left is behind him again, yes? They'll pay to their base. We saw that in the Michigan primary in the United States of America, where Democrats were very worried about losing the votes of some of the people who would normally vote for them. There's an issue that is global, and it's maybe very easy and simplistic for people to say, oh, it's all Netanyahu's fault. No, they're not looking at what's going on in the world.
I know, and I'll tell you something. It breaks my heart every time, all these years And it's not just Netanyahu. Okay, when I moved to Israel in 1977, Menachem Begin had just become prime minister. People forget. Okay, they have short memories, and they have this idea that somehow only Netanyahu is hated by the left. That's baloney. Okay, every Likud prime minister, everything, they were always hated by the left until the only time they stopped being is if they gave away land or they did something, they capitulated to the left. But the reason I'm even pointing that out is that the reason it hurts me when Israelis talk about that, particularly in the wake of October 7th, is that one thing Israelis and Jews have to get through their heads is that anti-Semitism or anti-Israel bias, I'm not talking like criticism of a government, you know what I mean, but when there is real hostility and bias that is not granted to other countries in similar situations, that it really doesn't matter to them who's prime minister, just as it didn't matter to the Nazis. If you were a really good German Jew who was not Jewish at all in your behavior or in your look, or, you just were good German listening to Mozart and all that, they didn't care. They marched those into the ovens as well. And the same thing on October 7th, the Hamas slaughtered progressive Israelis who believed in peace. And I'm not saying that sarcastically, by the way. If it came off that way, I didn't mean to. Israelis who were helping Hamas. They believed they were helping, Gazans get medical attention. They believed in peace. They hated any right-wing government, etc. And the point is that the Jew haters don't care if you're one of the, good Jews. They don't care what your politics are.
Well, what you said about Germany is personal for me. My grandfather, who actually knew until he passed away in 1970. No. Yes, 1970. No, I made a mistake. Anyone in my family who's listening to this program, I got the date wrong. In 1980, he passed away. He had fought in the First World War for the Kaiser, for the German king, and served his country honorably. And Hitler comes to power. That doesn't count. Jew haters hate Jews no matter who they are or what they've been or what they've done, right? There's something about anti-Semitism that doesn't make that distinction. And you're 100% right about Hamas. Hamas, when they came across the border, they called those kibbutzim on our side of the frontier, on our side of the Green Line, they called them settlements.
And not just
and the people in them were called settlers. And they didn't ask you if you were pro-Netanyahu or anti-Netanyahu. Most of the people on the kibbutzim don't support Netanyahu. Whether you can look at the electoral, the way they vote. Most of the people there have a left agenda. Most of the people there were very, very critical of the Israeli government. And you're right, those communities were full of peace activists who used to go to the border, pick up Palestinians, take them to the hospital in Beersheba, make sure translated for them to make sure they understood everything the Israeli doctors were saying to them, and so forth. And they killed those people as well. And I think that's a wake-up call to Israelis who are sometimes we're so concerned about our own internal divisions. We have to, and rightly so, everyone's got their opinion. It's a democracy, yes. But we have to understand our enemies, whether it's Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas, they don't care about our divisions. They don't want us to be here, full stop. And I think that's something that we should always remember in our political debates. As long as, we can be as strident as we are in our opinions and our arguments and so forth. But ultimately, we're Israelis, we're Jews, and we have to remember that our enemies really don't give a hoot about our politics. It's about our very being that bothers them.
Yeah, on the contrary, we've had left-wing governments or right-wing governments that decided to give land for peace, all kinds of things. Did that prevent them from trying to kill us? No, on the contrary. Every time we made concessions, there was more bloodshed. So that's why I think it's just, I really hate it. I don't care what you feel about Netanyahu. I don't mean you personally. I mean, I don't care what one feels about Netanyahu as a politician or as a human being. It's irrelevant to how the enemy feels about Israel and Jews. So that's one thing. And I think people have got to stop being under this illusion. And I would like to just say, in case anyone misunderstood, when you said that those kibbutz, the people living on the kibbutzim, that Hamas called them settlers, let's just explain for a minute for anyone who doesn't quite grasp. The word settler only became a dirty word. It's not a dirty word. I'm a settler. We settled the land. What we say is we settled the land of Israel. Okay? There's nothing inherently bad about that word. but it came to be like a curse word against Jews in Judea and Samaria and Gaza. That's why we pulled them all out in 2005. The idea was that settlers are colonialists and they're oppressors. And they came, they settled on land that wasn't theirs. That's a lie. That Jews have only settled in Israel on land that is historically Jewish. But that's, again, forget that for a minute. Being a settler is not something negative. People settled Australia. They settled the frontier of America. That's not a bad word. In this context, though, when all people outside of Israel use the word settler, what they say is settlers are an obstacle to peace. That's become synonymous. And the Palestinians pick up the Western, they know how to manipulate Western, the Western mind frame and language. Okay, because what they really mean is global jihad, martyrdom for Allah, Jews and Christians, we're all going to kill you. Settlers, they use that word, but that's just because they know they're like people in England and France and Australia. Oh, yes, that's right. Those are bad people. They're settlers.
You said that settlements are, or the claim is, the allegation is that settlements are the obstacle to peace, often with a big capital THE, yes, the obstacle to peace. According to that logic, of all of Israel's borders, our most peaceful and quiet border should be the border between Israel and Gaza, because it was 20 years ago, this month, that Israel pulled out of Gaza and we took down the 20 Israeli settlements that actually were in the Gaza Strip before that. And the settlers who didn't want to leave, guess what? The state forcibly evacuated them. And yet, if settlements are the problem, if it's all about the settlements, yes? You can even take the argument a bit further to show how ludicrous it is. Okay, so there's a conflict between Israel and our neighbors, between Israel and the Palestinians, because of the settlements over the Green Line, right? That's the argument, right? And if the stupid Israelis, all they had to do was understand that if we take down the settlements, we'll have peace. The Israelis aren't smart enough to understand that. Okay, so there's the Gaza example where we took down settlements and we got the opposite of peace. But there's also a stronger example. Before 1967, did Israel have peace with its neighbors? Did we have peace with the Arab countries and with the Palestinians in 1966, in 1965? In other words, what was all that about? In other words, if I'm not mistaken, the PLO is established to liberate Palestine well before the 1967 war. And Fatah, the main organization that now runs the West Bank, yes, it was established, if I'm not mistaken, in 1959, right? It's more than a decade. Sorry, some decade. Don't want to get my numbers wrong, yes? But the whole idea is that the root of the problem is the settlements on the West Bank. And if only Israel took them down, and I'll say it now so you'll be happy with me, the settlements in Judea and Samaria, only if we took those settlements down, we could have peace. I'm sorry, it's baloney. And the politicians who just sprout this simplistic rubbish, it's just crazy. You said one last thing, though, and I think it deserves us to. You said that settlement is a good thing. People settled Australia, people settled Canada, people settled the frontier in the United States. It used to be part of the, go west, young man, a very famous statement in American history. It's not that today, especially not with progressives. Settlement is almost like slavery for many people. The white people came and settled Australia. For many people, that's a bad thing. They stole the land from the original. Same in Canada, same in the United States. You have this hold, and the Palestinians know how to exploit that for their own political purposes very cynically. And of course, I think you can make a very powerful argument and a truthful argument by saying that who are the indigenous people of this land that we're sitting here in Jerusalem and speaking from? The Jews. Where does the word Jew come from? They were maybe dispersed around the world, but they came from Judea. The Jews come from Judea. That's where the word comes from. And even Muslims who read their holy text, the Quran. Who was Muhammad fighting with? Jews. Jews were here in the Middle East. Jews were here in the Holy Land. Jews were in Arabia. We predate Islam. So if someone tells me that we're not indigenous to the neighborhood, I'd go tell them, learn your history and read your if they're Muslim, I'd say, go read your own holy book.
That's right. Now, it's not just the word settler. It's the word colonialist. That's another one, because colonialists also in America, all these countries that, as you said, it became a dirty word, right? Because they're colonizing. Although I have to say, the British really have a nerve if they have a criticism of colonizing. But but the real issue is that the word occupation. The idea is we are occupying. First of all, as you said, we're not occupying land that was Jewish throughout history. But the word occupation is also misleading, as you pointed out, the 6-Day War. There are people, and the Palestinians caught on to this, and they like to say that in English, or other languages. In Arabic, they don't say it. They say 1948. They say that the catastrophe is that Israel was ever established. But for foreign consumption, they say 1967 borders. That was the 6-Day War. But who occupied those lands before those countries attacked Israel and then Israel won that war? Israel wasn't occupying the so-called West Bank. You know that. There was Jordan, and it was Syria occupying the Golan Heights, and it was Egypt occupying the Gaza. And this
Now, can I argue with you? We're coming to the end of our time, and I just want to make two brief points. Number one, there was a military occupation of Gaza by Egypt. Factually, if you call Israel's occupation, yes, it was one occupation that just followed another occupation. The West Bank was occupied by Jordan. It was not an independent country. It was occupied, and only the British and the Pakistanis gave legitimacy to that occupation. The Arab League refused to give legitimacy. The UN refused to give legitimacy. So in 1967, one occupation, if you believe Israel is occupied, was replaced by another. In Syria, I think you're wrong. I think according to the international maps and everything, that the Golan Heights was Syrian before 1967. It wasn't like an occupation force. Having said that, I don't think anyone in Israel has any intention of returning Syria anytime soon, because we were attacked from that territory on numerous occasions before 1967. My wife grew up on a kibbutz that was routinely bombed on our side of the border, yes, the kibbutz, routinely bombed by the Syrians on the Golan Heights, and as children they ran to the bomb shelters and so forth and so on. Last point, because we're running out of time and I apologize. You talked about the British accusing Israel of colonialism. Okay, there's a joke in that itself, yes? Maybe, though, many Brits, by saying we're stridently anti-Israel, they're trying to atone for their past sins and take it out on the Jews. Has many historical precedents, yes? But I would say the following. They seem to forget the man that you supported. You mentioned him before when you came on Aliyah in 1977, a certain Mr. Begin and a certain Mr. Shamir, who led these underground struggles to get the British to leave. Are we a creation of British colonialism? Are we colonialists if actually we had to fight to get the British to leave? In fact, all those people in Ireland who hate our guts, who've adopted the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel agenda, hook, line, and sinker, they should know that the Jewish underground here modeled themselves on the struggle of the Ireland to get their independence at the end of the First World War. That's the truth.
Well, absolutely. And on that note, I'm telling you, we could just go on and on because there's just so much. Not only is there so much going on, but there's so much history that needs explaining. But that's for another time, and we'll see you next week, Mark.
I look forward to that, Ruthie.